Saren had worn the betrothal ring for exactly 11 days when the Alpha King came for her. The great hall of House Ilvin had been draped in white silk and winter lilies for the occasion. 200 guests filled the long tables beneath the vaulted ceiling. Nobles from the eastern provinces, merchant lords in embroidered velvet, and the lesser wolves of 4 allied packs had all come to witness the formal joining of House Ilvin and House Murhin. Candlelight danced on the silver plates. Musicians played softly from the gallery. And at the high table beneath a canopy of pale green silk, Saren Mirren sat beside the man she was to marry. She did not love Lord Halric. She had told herself that this did not matter. Love was a luxury for those who had never been burned by it, and she had been burned so thoroughly that she no longer trusted the warmth of any flame. Halric was gentle. Halric was steady. Halric asked nothing of her that she could not give, and he did not ask why her hands still trembled when the wind blew from the east, from the direction of the royal court at Veilon. She touched the ring on her finger beneath the table. The emerald was old, pulled from the vaults of House Ilven, and it pressed cold against her skin. 2 years. It had been 2 years since she had fled the royal court in the dead of night, since she had ridden south on a borrowed horse with nothing but the clothes on her back and a wound in her chest that had never fully closed. 2 years since the Alpha King had looked through her as though she had never mattered at all. She would not think of him. Not tonight. The great doors at the end of the hall groaned open. A draft rushed through the chamber, guttering the nearest candles. Conversation faltered. The musicians lowered their instruments. Guests turned in their seats. Saren did not need to look. She had felt the change a heartbeat before the doors opened, a pulling in her ribs so familiar and so forbidden that her body reacted before her mind could catch up. The old scar at the base of her throat, the one she had kept hidden beneath high collars for 2 years, began to burn. No. Her eyes lifted anyway. Varric stood in the open doorway. He was taller than she remembered. Broader. The years had sharpened him the way a blade is sharpened, stripping away every softness until only edge remained. He wore no crown, no ceremonial robe, only the black of his traveling leathers and a long dark coat that swept behind him as he stepped into the hall. 6 of his royal wolves stood at his back, silent and watchful. Every soul in the great hall rose. Saren rose with them because her legs moved without her permission. "My king," Lord Halric said, recovering first. He descended from the dais with careful grace. "This is an honor unannounced. Our humble celebration is yours to witness." Varric did not answer him. Varric was looking at her. His eyes were the color of wet iron in lamplight, and they had not moved from her face since the doors had opened. There was no expression in them that Saren could name. Only a terrible, patient attention, the attention of a predator that has already decided and is simply waiting for its quarry to understand. Her scar burned. Through the bond she had spent 2 years trying to bury, something stirred. Halric reached the bottom of the dais and bowed. "If it please your majesty, the ceremony is nearly concluded. Perhaps your majesty would honor us by joining the feast, and we may discuss whatever business has brought you. Step aside." The Alpha King's voice was quiet. It carried the full length of the hall regardless. Halric hesitated. "Majesty?" "Step aside." He did. Varric crossed the hall without haste. His boots struck the stone floor in a rhythm Saren could feel in the soles of her own feet. The guests parted before him like wheat before a scythe, and not one of them spoke. She saw the old dowagers clutching their pearls. She saw the stewards frozen beside their pitchers of wine. She saw Halric standing foolishly beside the dais with his hands open at his sides. And then Varric stood before her. This close, she could smell him. Pine and smoke, and the faint iron of a hard ride. She had once known that scent better than her own name. She had once fallen asleep with it on her pillow and woken with it on her skin. "Saren," he said. Her name in his mouth was an accusation, a reckoning, a prayer she had forbidden herself to hear. She forced her chin up. 2 years of silence, 2 years of swallowing the hurt, 2 years of teaching herself to walk past mirrors without flinching. All of it rose up in her now as the only armor she had. She lifted her left hand between them. The emerald caught the candlelight. I am taken, she said. Her voice did not shake. Varek looked down at the ring. He looked at it the way one looks at an insult that has not yet been answered. And then, slowly, with a care that somehow frightened her more than violence would have, his gloved fingers closed around the emerald and drew it from her finger. The ring came off without resistance. He held it up between them for a single heartbeat. His iron eyes lifted to hers. Not anymore. Somewhere behind her, Halric made a sound that might have been her name. The ring dropped from the Alpha King's fingers. It struck the stone floor with a small, ordinary sound and rolled beneath the dais. And Saren, who had not wept in 2 years, who had trained every muscle in her body to be still, felt the first hot tear break against her cheek before she could stop it. Not anymore. The words detonated in her chest the way his teeth had once detonated against her throat. All those years ago, in a forest clearing she had sworn she would never let herself remember. The hall was silent, 200 witnesses, and she understood, with a clarity that was almost merciful in its cruelty, that her quiet life had just ended. She did not remember how she got to the east corridor. Her feet carried her. Her body, which had held itself so still for so long, remembered how to run. She pushed past the servants at the side door, past the kitchens, past the herb garden where the winter lilies had been cut for her own betrothal, and out into the snow-softened night where the air was cold enough to hurt. Behind her, in the great hall, voices were rising. She heard Halric, louder than he had ever been, demanding the king answer for this outrage. She heard the old patriarch of House Ilvin speaking of treaties broken and blood owed. She heard the voices of Varek's wolves, low and controlled, forming a perimeter. And beneath it all, she heard nothing from Varek himself, which was somehow worse. Her horse was in the stable. Her chest was burning. The scar at the base of her throat had not burned in 2 years, and now it blazed like a brand freshly laid. And she understood with terrible clarity that the bond she had believed dead had not been dead at all. It had only been sleeping. It had only been waiting. And the Alpha King had woken it with a single word. Not anymore. Saren reached the stable. The boy who tended the horses was still at the feast. She saddled the gray mare herself with shaking hands, the way she had once saddled a borrowed horse 2 years ago, the way she was apparently condemned to keep saddling horses in the dark. The mare stamped and blew. Saren pressed her forehead to the animal's warm neck for one breath, and then she was up and riding. She did not go south. South was where Halric's men would think to look. She went west, into the foothills of the Morovale, where the roads were bad and the villages were small, and a woman in a torn betrothal gown could, with luck, disappear. She rode until the snow turned her lashes to ice. She rode until the great hall of House Ilvin was only a memory of candlelight shrinking behind her. She rode until the burning at her throat began, at last, to fade. And she did not see, because she had not looked back, the figure standing on the high balcony of the hall as she vanished into the trees. Varek watched her go. He had crossed the hall to the tall arched window the moment the chaos behind him had been contained, the moment his second had stepped between him and the old lord and murmured, "Majesty, let me handle this." He had climbed 2 flights of stairs in silence. He had pushed open the balcony doors. He had stood there with his hands on the stone railing, and he had watched the gray mare carry her out of the courtyard and through the outer gate and into the dark. He did not call her back. He did not send his wolves. The emerald ring was still in his closed fist. He had picked it up from the floor of the great hall before he had left it. He opened his hand now and looked at it in the pale spill of moonlight. It was a poor ring, old, but poor. The emerald was clouded at its heart. The band had been sized down twice to fit a smaller hand. It was the ring of a house that had spent its coin on the appearance of marriage rather than on a woman who deserved better than appearance. He closed his fingers around it. Majesty. His second had come up the stairs behind him. The man's voice was careful, the way one might speak to an animal in a trap. The Ilven will demand answers. The old lord is calling for arbitration before the council. If you do not address them before dawn, the formal complaint will reach Valen before you do. Torvin. Majesty. How long? A pause. Majesty. How long has she been here? Varric did not turn from the window. His eyes were still on the tree line where the gray mare had vanished. In the east, betrothed to that child. Torvin's voice was even more careful. 11 days, Majesty. The formal betrothal was conducted 11 days past. We intercepted the courier's notice 3 days ago. 11 days. Yes, Majesty. And she was alive for the 2 years before that. Somewhere. And no one told me. Torvin did not answer because there was no safe answer. Varric's hand tightened on the ring. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational, the voice he used when he was about to do something that other men would spend the rest of their lives regretting. Find out who kept her from me, Majesty, and find her. We will begin at first light. The trails west are dangerous in this weather, and the Ilven will certainly... Tonight, Torvin. Majesty, in this weather, the trails above the Morrow Vale are all but impassable. If we send men out now, we will lose them before we find her. Varric turned from the window at last. His eyes had gone the color they went only very rarely, when the wolf beneath the man had stopped being beneath, and had come, instead, very near to the surface. Torvin, who had served 3 kings in his life and was afraid of almost nothing, took half a step back without meaning to. Tonight, said the Alpha King. Far to the west, in the first low folds of the Morrow Vale, a gray mare picked her careful way along a frozen track, and the woman on her back did not feel the searching pulse begin to move through the bond at her throat. She only felt it fade. She mistook it, as she had always mistaken it, for absence. 6 weeks later, the village of Ashenmoor had decided that the new healer was shy. This suited Saren, because she was easy to be. She had arrived in the middle of a storm with 1 saddlebag, a horse she had sold to the carter, and a story about being the widow of a wool merchant from the far coast. The village elders had taken her in because the previous healer had died in autumn, and the children had gone without poultices for 3 months. They had given her the stone cottage at the bend of the Ashen Brook, and a new name. They called her Mira. She answered to it well enough. She set the broken wrist of the cooper's boy. She brewed willow tea for the smith's wife. She stitched the miller's son when he opened his leg on a scythe, and the miller had paid her in flour and a smoked ham, and by the end of her 5th week in the village, no one asked about her old life anymore. In the cottage at the bend of the Ashen Brook, she slept with the shutters closed. She had not expected the scar to keep burning. Among wolf kind, a rejected bond was supposed to ebb. A claiming mark left unclaimed, unhonored, and unfed by its maker would darken and settle, and finally subside into ordinary skin. Saren had been told this as a girl, in the years before she had believed it would ever matter to her personally. She had repeated it to herself, every night for 2 years, the way other women repeated prayers. The scar should have faded. It had not faded. It had quieted, in the long months after she had fled the royal court at Valon. But it had never gone. And in the 6 weeks since the great hall of House Ilven, since the Alpha King had stood before her and drawn an old emerald off her hand, the scar had done something new. It had begun to listen. That was the only word Saren had for it. At night, when the cottage was still, When the coals had settled and the wind moved softly over the thatch, the small raised line at the base of her throat warmed, and something on the other side of the warmth pressed against her. It was not a voice. It was not a thought. It was a shape of attention, vast and patient, the way the night itself is attentive, and she would lie with her hand over her throat, and she would feel it, and she would tell herself that she felt nothing. She had begun to dream again, as well. She did not want to speak of the dreams, even to herself. In them, a man walked the length of a stone gallery under a moon she could not see. He never spoke. He moved from one tall window to the next, stopping at each as though looking for something he already knew would not be there. Sometimes he would lay his gloved hand flat against the glass. Sometimes he would close his eyes. Sometimes, very rarely, he would say her name, and Saren would wake with the name still on her own mouth, and the scar at her throat burning so hotly that she had to press cold water to it before she could sleep again. She did not believe the dreams were real. She could not afford to. She was kneeling in the herb garden behind the cottage on the afternoon the village child came running. The day was bright and cold and smelled of wet earth. Saren had her skirt kilted up, her hands in the dirt, her fingers working the last frost-bitten roots of the autumn rosemary free of the soil. The child's voice reached her before the child did, thin and breathless, the way children's voices get when they have run a long way with news. "Mira, Mira, come quick, they have come to the inn." Saren rose, wiping her hands on her apron. The child was Pella, the innkeeper's youngest, 9 years old with a permanent scrape on one knee. Her cheeks were red with cold and running. "Who has come, sweetling?" "Riders." Pella gulped air. "From the north. My father says they are the king's." The herb in Saren's hand came apart between her fingers. She did not answer for a breath. Her scar had gone cold, which was worse than burning. "The king's men," she said carefully. "Not just men." Pella's eyes were enormous. "Wolves. My father saw them on the ridge at dawn. Gray ones and black. They have been moving through the valleys for 3 days, and no one knows what they are looking for." Saren knelt down to the child's height, because she was not certain her legs would hold her otherwise. "Pella," she said gently, "did these men come into the village?" "Not yet. They are at the Crossroads Inn, 2 miles off. My father says they have asked after a woman." The child's voice dropped, as children's voices do when they are repeating something they have only half understood. "A woman with a mark on her throat." The herb garden was very quiet. The ashen brook went on running over its small stones at the foot of the garden, not knowing and not caring. Saren put her hand on Pella's thin shoulder. "You have been brave to come. Run home now, sweetling. Tell your mother I said to keep you close tonight." Pella ran. Saren stayed on her knees in the cold earth for a long moment. Then she rose, and she went into the cottage, and she shut the door behind her, and she leaned her forehead against the wood and closed her eyes. Her throat burned. Through the bond she had insisted to herself was dead, something ancient and unhurrying was drawing closer. She could feel it now, the way one feels a thunderstorm before it is visible on the horizon. Not yet arrived. Not far. He was looking for her. And this time, unlike 2 years ago, he was going to find her. Saren moved through the cottage the way she had moved through the stable at House Ilvin 6 weeks earlier. Her body knew how to do this now. Her hands knew how to pull the worn leather pack from beneath the bed. Her feet knew which floorboard by the hearth did not creak. Her mind, which had learned to stop asking questions, asked none now. She took the small purse of coins the village had paid her. She took the second dress, the wool one, from the peg by the door. She took the knife she had stopped thinking of as a weapon and remembered now was a weapon. She wrapped 2 loaves of bread in clean linen. She filled the water skin from the jug by the hearth. She did not light a lamp. The afternoon light through the shutters was enough. When she had all she could carry, she knelt by the foot of the bed and lifted the loose hearthstone she had marked with a small notch of chalk on the day she had first arrived in Ashenmoor. Beneath it was a hollow she had hollowed deeper in her second week. And in the hollow, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, was the one thing she had brought from Valon and never been able to throw away. She set it on the bed. She had not opened it in 2 years. On the night she had fled the royal court, an old woman had caught her in the servants' passage. The woman had been called Orla. Orla had been Saren's nurse when Saren was small, and Orla had served her own mother before that. And Orla had been the only soul at court who had ever looked at Saren and seen the frightened girl beneath the borrowed manners. Orla had pressed a small square of folded parchment into Saren's hand at the rear gate of the royal court. "Do not read this here," Orla had said. Her face had been wet, her hands had been shaking. "Read it when you are far enough that reading it will not kill you to read. Do you hear me, sweetling? Far enough, swear it." Saren had sworn. She had ridden south with the parchment against her heart, and at the first inn, when she had finally slept, she had not been able to open it. At the second inn, she had tried. Her hands had refused. Every time she had taken it out in the years that followed, something in her had closed around it like a fist around a flame, and she had put it back. And she had told herself she would read it tomorrow, and tomorrow had become a month. And a month had become a season, and a season had become 2 years. Tonight, with the king's wolves 2 miles off, and her scar burning and her old life unraveling for the second time, she untied the twine. The parchment was yellowed at the folds. Orla's hand was neat and small. "My dove, if you are reading this, you are away and safe, and for that I thank every god I was ever taught to name. But I could not let you go without the truth. You were not sent away that night, Saren. The king did not dismiss you. The king did not even know what was done in his name. His cup was tampered with at the council supper. The decree that carried his seal was written in his chambers while he slept, and the seal was pressed by a hand that was not his. He woke thinking he had been taken ill, and by the time he was himself again, you were already beyond the walls. He does not know you are gone. He believes, my dove, that you went home to your own people in anger, and that you will return to him when your anger has cooled. He has been told a very clever lie. I could not tell him. I could not reach him. I could not even reach you before you rode out. I write this because I cannot bear for you to carry the wrong name of it in your heart. He did not choose to lose you. They chose for him. When he learns, my dove, he will come. And whatever anger you have kept for him all these years, you must put it down before he finds you, because his will be greater. Forgive him. Forgive me for not being faster. Burn this. Orla. Saren read it once. She read it again. She did not burn it. She sat on the edge of the bed with the parchment in her hands and understood, with the ringing hollow quality of a bell struck in an empty chamber, that she had been wrong for 2 years. About everything. About him. About the shape of the grief she had built her entire new life around. Outside, a crow called from the roof of the woodshed, and somewhere far down the track toward the Crossroads Inn, a horn sounded once, thin and clean in the cold air. Saren did not move. The parchment trembled between her fingers. Then the knock came at the door. 3 measured raps, not hurried, not loud. The knock of a man who knew she would be listening. "Lady Mirren." A man's voice, beyond the boards, measured like the knock. "I serve the Alpha King. I have come with word and with warning. Please open the door." Saren's hand closed around Orla's parchment. She did not answer. "Lady Mirren, my name is Torven. I watched you leave the Ilven Hall 6 weeks ago. My king has given me one task since that night, and it is to find you and to keep you alive long enough for him to reach you. Please, there is very little time." Her scar burned so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She took one step toward the door, then another. The first arrow came through the shutter of the back window. It struck the bedpost 2 handspans from her hip, and the black fletching shivered, and the tip of the shaft was slick with something that was not blood. Saren dropped to her knees. Another arrow followed, then another. The shutters on the western wall cracked apart. Glass she could not have afforded to replace shattered into the wash basin. Through the splintered board, she saw movement at the tree line, cloaked figures, drawn bows, 3, 5, more. The voice at the door sharpened. "Lady Mirren, open the door." The bolt on the door was flimsy. Saren had never bothered to replace it. No one in Ashenmore locked their doors, and she had not wanted to seem the kind of woman who did. Torvin did not wait for her permission. The door shook on its hinges at his shoulder. Once, and on the second blow, the bolt tore free of the frame with a dry crack. He came through low and fast, his long coat flaring, a curved blade already in his right hand. Before Saren could rise from the floor, he had closed the door behind him with his heel and put his back against it, and taken in the broken western shutter, the arrow in the bedpost, and the yellowed parchment clenched in her fist, all in the time it took her to draw one breath. His eyes stopped on the parchment. "Orla's hand," he said. It was not a question. Saren stared at him. "How do you know Orla's hand?" "Because I have read 3 letters she wrote for my king over 10 years. Torvin crouched without letting go of the door. His voice was low, quick, the voice of a man rationing every second. "She wrote it, did she not?" "She told you." Saren nodded, because she could not yet speak. "Good," Torvin said. "Good, my lady, that will save us a great deal of time." Another arrow buried itself in the door behind him. The point of it came through the wood a finger's breadth from his neck. He did not flinch. Outside, something heavy struck the eastern wall of the cottage, and there was a short, sharp snarling, and then a wet sound that Saren knew without being told was the end of something living. "Listen to me, Lady Mirren. We have my 2 wolves outside. They are very good, and they are very angry, and they will not be enough. There are 7 bowmen at the tree line, and more coming down along the brook, and at least one among them is not shooting to wound. They did not come for you tonight. They have been waiting for the evening my king's men reached your door. They need you dead before you can be reclaimed. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "Yes," Saren whispered. "Your scar burns." "Yes." "He is an hour behind me, my lady. Perhaps less. I rode ahead because he would have torn down the village to reach you, and I could not allow that." Torvin's mouth tightened. "Now, I need you to stand." She stood. He reached inside his coat with his offhand and drew out something wrapped in black silk. He did not open it. He laid it in her palm and closed her fingers over it. "He has carried this against his ribs for 6 weeks, Torvin said. "I take it off him when he sleeps and put it back before he wakes. He does not know I do this. I am telling you because it is the only way I can make you believe me fast enough." Saren looked down. Through the silk she could feel the hard round edge of the emerald and the narrow band she had last seen drop from his gloved fingers to the stone floor of the Ilvan Hall. She had not, of course, seen it drop again. She had been riding west. For one strange, suspended heartbeat, she was not in the cottage at all. She was in the warm, close air of the Ilvan ballroom, with 200 witnesses holding their breath, and the weight of his iron gaze was on her face, and his gloved fingers were moving toward her hand, and she could feel, now, for the first time, that his hand had been trembling. She had not seen it then. She had been too afraid to see it. Her chest cracked open in a place she had thought permanently closed. 2 years, she said, and her voice surprised her with how steady it was. 2 years, Torven. If he did not choose to send me away, why did no one come? Why did he never come? He did not know. For 2 years. He was told you had returned to your mother's people in the Southern Isles. A courier was sent south with his hand on the seal. Letters came back. Letters we thought came back. They were forged, my lady. Every one of them. Your name in your own hand, which Orla found out was copied from an old hunting book you once wrote your name inside as a girl. He believed you had gone home to grieve a marriage you had not been ready for. He mourned you like a man whose wife has chosen another country over him. He drank too much and slept too little, and was worse at being a king. He stopped hunting. He stopped laughing. He forbade your name in his presence because the sound of it undid him. And then, 7 weeks ago, the Ilvan betrothal notice crossed the border. And he saw at last that the world had been lying to him, and he has not slept since. He has not eaten a full meal in 6 weeks, my lady. He has ridden 4 horses to their knees reaching you. I have watched a king I have served for 15 years become a man I barely recognize. And I am telling you this because you need to know what you are about to see when he comes through that door. Saren could not breathe. Who? She said. Who gave the order? My lady, we do not have the time. Who? Torvin's eyes went past her to the broken window and back. Sovereign. The order came from Lord Sovereign. But the hand that mixed the cup at the council supper 2 years ago was not his. It was his eldest daughter's. Outside, a wolf screamed. Not a howl. A scream. One of Torvin's. Saren felt it in the bond, somehow, as though the edges of her own nerves had been extended through the door and into the snow. My lady, I am sorry, Torvin said, and she saw that he meant it. I am so sorry. It is an old grief, and it will have to wait. The west wall came apart. Not all of it. A section of board and shutter where the arrows had weakened it, kicked in by a heavy boot, and through the ragged gap stepped a woman in dark leathers with the lower half of her face bound in black cloth. She carried a short blade in each hand, and her eyes, above the cloth, were the pale, clear blue of frozen water. Saren had seen those eyes across a table at Valen for an entire winter. The woman lowered the cloth. Hello, Saren, said Isen Sovereign. Isen had been Saren's closest companion in the first season at court. They had braided each other's hair on winter mornings. They had laughed together in the gallery above the council hall. Isen had been the one who had told Saren, with shining eyes, that the Alpha King had asked after her name. Isen had been the one who had woven the white flowers through Saren's hair on the first night Varek had taken her walking in the forest. Isen had held her hand the first time Saren had wept with happiness, and Isen had poured the wine at Saren's 20th birthday, and Isen had whispered over that wine that Saren was going to be a queen. Isen had wept when Saren rode out of Valen. Saren remembered this very clearly because the memory of that weeping had been one of the few things she had allowed herself to keep warm in all the cold years since. Oh, pet, Isen said. Her voice was exactly the same. You should have stayed south. You really should have. Torvin moved before Saren did. He came off the door in one clean motion, his curved blade rising, and Isen's left-hand knife met it with a flat, bright ring that filled the small cottage. Her second knife was already looking for Saren. Saren stumbled back against the wall, Orla's parchment falling from her hand, Varek's ring still closed in her other fist. 2 more attackers came through the broken wall behind Isen. Torvin was very good. He killed the first of them with a single upward cut that opened the man from hip to collarbone. The second he broke across the hearth. But Isen was better than Torvin, and Saren saw, in the terrible, slow way that these things can be seen, that Torvin was going to lose. Isen's second knife found the meat of his shoulder. He went down on one knee. He did not drop his blade. Run, my lady, he said through his teeth. West door. Now. Saren did not run. She had spent 2 years running, and she had been wrong about what she had been running from, and she was done. She looked at Isen across the body of the man Torvin had killed. Isenna, she said. Isenna turned. The pale blue eyes settled on her with a kind of weary affection, and that, More than anything else in the whole terrible day was what broke something final in Saren's chest. "It is not personal, pet," Isen said gently. "It never was. You were only ever in the way. You braided my hair. Yes. You wept when I left. Yes, pet. I did." Isen's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile and almost nothing at all. "I am not a monster. I loved you, but I loved my house more. Those are old words, and they are true words, and we can sort them later. Move aside." She raised the knife. Saren lifted her open hands. She had not called the silver in 14 years. She had been 9 years old the last time, in a hayloft, frightened of a stable dog that had cornered her, and her mother had come running and had slapped her across the face so hard that she had never tried it again. "Never," her mother had said. "Never in your life. Not for anything. Do you swear it to me, Saren? Swear." She had sworn. She unswore now. The silver came easier than she remembered. It came the way a held breath comes, the way a song finds the throat of a woman who has been told all her life that she cannot sing. It poured out of the heart of her palms in a cold white light that had no warmth in it and no cruelty either, only a kind of old truthfulness, and the air in the cottage went bright and strange. The frost on the broken window turned to glittering dust. The edges of Torvin's blade caught the glow and burned like a second lamp. The parchment on the floor lifted at its corner as though a soft wind had found it. Isen's knife flinched back. Isen's eyes, above the blade, went wide. "Oh," Isen whispered. "Oh, pet. They never told me you were one of those. They never told me, Saren. I swear to you, they never—" The silver flared. It did not strike Isen. It passed through the space between them and found the two men coming in through the broken wall behind her, and they staggered back with their arms over their faces as though the light had weight, and Torvin was on his feet again somehow, his wounded shoulder pressed hard against the doorframe, and the light spilled past him out into the yard, and Saren heard the attackers in the tree line crying out in confused voices, and she understood, distantly, that she had forgotten how much this cost. The edges of her vision were already darkening. "Saren." Torvin's hand was on her elbow, the grip hard and the voice harder. "My lady. Enough. Enough. He will reach us. Hold, my lady, hold. Enough." She let the silver go. The cottage was suddenly very dim. The two men on the floor were not moving. Isen was in the broken doorway with one hand against the frame, her face bone white, her other knife lowered and forgotten at her side. "You cannot hold that," Isen said. Her voice had thinned. "Not at your weight. Not in your state. You will burn out before the next wave reaches you." She was not wrong. Saren could feel the cold crawling inward from her fingers. Isen took one step back, then another. Her eyes did not leave Saren's face, and there was something in them now that Saren had not seen in 2 years of remembering her, something that looked almost like grief. "Tell him," she said, "when he finds you. Tell him we were faster than he thinks. Tell him my father sends his kindest regards. And tell him, pet, that I am sorry about the cup. I was the one who carried it to him. I thought it would only make him sleep." She turned. She was almost to the tree line when the brook at the foot of the garden cracked. Not broke, cracked. A long, deep splitting sound, the sound old ice makes when something very heavy crosses it. Saren staggered to the broken window with Torvin's hand still at her elbow, and they stood together looking out at the low stretch of the ashen brook, at the split black line running across the ice, at the shape rising from the cold mist of the water on the far side. It was a wolf. He was the size of a small horse. His fur was the black of a sky with no stars in it. The mist from the broken brook rose around his shoulders and caught on his coat in small bright drops, and when he set his forepaw on the near bank the frost bloomed white under the pad of his foot. His eyes, across the garden, found her. They were not the color of wet iron now. They were gold. Pure, blazing gold, the gold of a forge at its hottest hour, and they fixed on Saren through the shattered window and did not move. Behind him, through the trees, she could hear the pouring sound of more wolves coming. The Alpha King had arrived. The wolf crossed the garden. Each step he took left a print of frost in the dead grass. The silver light Saren had called into the cottage was gone, and the late afternoon had gone gray, and the air at the broken window tasted of iron and river water and the faint green cold of the wolf himself as he came on. Torvin let go of her elbow. Torvin stepped back. Saren did not step back. She could not have moved if she had wanted to. Whatever strength had kept her on her feet through the silver was bleeding out of her now, and her knees were going soft in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the body's simple recognition of the one creature in the world it had been shaped to recognize. The mark at her throat was no longer burning. The mark at her throat was warm in the way a hearth is warm, and it had been 2 years since she had felt warm from the inside. The wolf reached the broken window. He did not come through it. He lowered himself to the ground instead, the great bulk of him easing down into the trampled snow of the herb garden, and he lay there like a dog at the foot of a bed, and he put his chin on the stone sill and looked up at her. Saren made a sound she did not recognize. She did not know she had dropped to her knees until her knees were on the floor. They were of a height, then, on either side of the shattered glass. His gold eyes were very close. She could see the small bright drops of brook mist still caught in the black fur at his muzzle, and she could see the frost on his lashes, and she could see the blood on his teeth, and she could see that he was, somehow, still not breathing very hard. "Varric," she whispered. The wolf closed his eyes. Just for a breath. Just long enough for her to understand that he had been waiting 6 weeks to hear her say that, and that the sound of it had gone through him the way her silver had gone through the men on her floor. Then the change took him. It was nothing like the change her mother had described to her as a girl. There was no cracking of bone, no violent unmaking. The wolf at the sill simply gathered. Light gathered at his shoulders and at his flanks, and the shape of him shortened and lengthened at once. And within a breath, a man was kneeling on the snow outside her broken window, and he was bare to the waist, and his breath was plumes of white on the cold air, and his eyes had gone from gold to the wet iron she remembered, and he was looking at her the way a man looks at the one lamp in a country of dark. He did not speak. He reached his hand through the broken window. His palm opened flat in the ruined air between them, offered the way one offers bread, and Saren looked at his hand and she saw that it was shaking. She had not seen Varric's hands shake since the night in the forest clearing when he had told her what she was to him. Her own hand lifted. It was shaking too. She laid it in his, and his fingers closed around hers, very carefully, the way a man closes his fingers around a bird, and then, slowly, as though testing whether the world would end if he did, he drew her hand to his mouth and pressed his forehead against her knuckles. Saren. That was all he said. Only her name, again, with his head bowed over her hand. He had never in his life, Saren thought distantly, lowered his head to anything. He was lowering it now. For a long moment there was nothing in the world but the cold at the broken window and the heat of his forehead against her skin and the small white clouds of his breathing on her wrist. Torvin, somewhere behind her, moved quietly away. Outside, the pouring sound of more wolves in the trees had softened into the ordinary sounds of horses being led and voices giving orders. The world was going on. The world had remembered how to go on. Then Varric lifted his head, and his eyes found her other hand. The one closed around the silk bundle. His expression fractured. It was very small, the fracture. If Saren had not spent one winter at Valon watching his face for every flicker of what he would not say, she would have missed it. But she had spent that winter, and she did not miss it. The iron in his eyes went a shade darker. The line of his mouth went, for one beat, unfamiliar. He had recognized the silk. Torvin, Varric said. He did not look away from her hand. You took it again. Yes, Majesty. In the hour before I rode. Yes, Majesty. I wondered. Torvin did not answer. Varric's gaze lifted back to Saren's face. Something had surfaced in his eyes that had not been there a moment before, and she saw with a small, terrible lurch that it was shame. I did not mean for you to see it in his hand, he said. I did not mean for you to know it that way. Saren stepped back. She did not know she was going to do it until her foot moved, but the small hollow place in her chest that had been filled, only moments before, with a warmth she had forgotten how to hold, had cooled again, very fast, and she could feel all 2 years standing up inside her, the way old armor stands when a woman puts it on. Her hand slipped out of his. He let her go. He let her go. That was, perhaps, the most terrible thing of all. The Alpha King of Valon, who had ridden 4 horses to their knees to reach her, who had broken the Ashen Brook to cross to her, did not close his fingers when she drew her hand away. He only watched her, on his knees in the snow outside her cottage, and he waited. Stand up, Saren said. Her voice was not steady. She hated that her voice was not steady. Saren. Stand up, Varric. He stood. He was a head taller than her on any ordinary day. Through the broken window with her on her knees and him on his feet, he seemed very tall and very still and very tired, and the shadows under his eyes were so dark in the gray afternoon that she could have put her thumb into them. You and I, she said, are going to have a conversation. She was not going to have it through a broken window on her knees. Saren rose and she walked to the door that Torvin had broken open, and she stepped out into the cold of the herb garden. The yard between the cottage and the brook was no longer a yard she recognized. Bodies lay half-covered in the churned snow. One of Torvin's wolves was dead against the woodshed wall. The other was upright on 3 legs, watching the tree line. Varric's own wolves moved among the trees, silent. The Alpha King's wolves did not leave men alive to scream. Saren did not look at any of it. She stopped 3 paces from Varric, and she turned, and she faced him. He had found a cloak somewhere. He wore it loose over his bare shoulders. The cold did not seem to touch him, and Saren remembered, with the small pang of a memory she had not let herself keep, that the cold had never touched him. Tell me, she said. Saren? Tell me yourself. Not Torvin. Not Orla. You. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him measuring what he was about to say, weighing the version that would comfort her against the version that was true, and she watched him choose the true one. I did not know, Varric said quietly, that you had gone. For how long did you not know? 16 days. She had not expected a number. The specificity of it took her legs out from under her. 16 days. For 16 days he had believed she was still in his life. She had never let herself think about his discovery at all. They told you I had left you. They showed me a letter in your hand. Orla said the hand was copied. From an old book. Yes. I know that now. I did not know it then. Varric's throat worked. Saren. I read that letter every night for 3 weeks. I slept with it under my pillow. Then I stopped sleeping. Varric. I am not telling you this to win you back. I know you are not. I am telling you because you asked. I know. The wind moved across the garden. A few dry leaves scraped over the frozen ground. Somewhere down the track, a horn sounded again. Farther off now, the sound of a force retreating. I should have looked harder, Varric said. I should have questioned the letter. I should have torn the Southern Isles apart until I found you. Instead, I believed I had failed you, and I mourned. And every day I did, that was a day someone else was keeping you from me. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am telling you so that when you decide what you want to do, you will have the truth to decide with. Saren felt the tears come, and she did not bother to stop them. I hated you, she said. I know. I built my entire life on hating you. I know. I was going to marry that man, Varric. I know. I sat at his table. I learned to answer to his name for me. I wore his ring on my hand. I taught myself, morning by morning, to be someone other than the woman who was yours, because the woman who was yours was going to kill me from the inside if I did not bury her. Do you understand what I am telling you? Yes. And now you come here, and you tell me you did not throw me away, and you put an old ring in my hand, and you kneel in the snow, and you expect... I do not expect anything. Do not. I do not, Saren. Do not, she said, and her voice broke on the word, and she put her hand over her mouth to hold the rest of it in. He took one step toward her. He did not take a second. Tell me to go, he said, and I will go. I will ride out tonight. I will answer to the Ilvan Council for what I did in that hall. I will put the ring back on your finger myself, and walk out of this valley and never speak your name again. You will not see me. You will not feel me. I will find a way to close what is left of the bond, so it does not burn you. You have a life. You have earned a life. If this is the life you want, I will give it to you. Saren stared at him. The wind moved again. Her tears were cold on her face. Varric, she whispered. I will, Saren. I swear it. I do not want that. Tell me what you want. I want... Her breath caught. She could not get the word out. She tried again. I want you to understand that I loved you, Varric. All these 2 years. I loved you so badly I made myself sick with it. And I hated you because that was the only way I knew how to bear loving you. And if you had come even one day earlier, I would have... I know. No, you do not. Because I love you still. The words were out before she had decided to say them. They hung between them in the cold air. Varric closed his eyes. He did not move. He stood in the middle of the ruined garden with his bare chest rising and falling under the borrowed cloak, and the Alpha King, who did not weep for anything, wept then. Silently, without sound, the way strong men weep when no one is supposed to see it. Saren crossed the 3 paces between them. She put her hand on his chest, over his heart, where she had once pressed her palm on the night he had told her she was his, and she felt the thunder of him under her palm the way she had felt it then, only louder, only harder, and he lowered his forehead to hers and his breath shook against her mouth. Saren, he said, Varric, I am going to be worth this. I know. It was, perhaps, the nearest thing either of them would ever come to a wedding. And it was then that the second horn sounded. Not from the direction the attackers had gone, from the north, from the royal road out of Vailon. A long, brazen, unbroken note, the kind of call that was only ever sounded for one reason. Torvin was at the garden gate before Saren understood what the sound meant. Majesty, Torvin said, and his voice was hollow. The city. Varric lifted his head. He did not let go of her. Speak. Sovereign has moved on Vailon, Majesty. They struck at dawn. They have taken the High Council. They have taken Lady Orla. The herald says... Torvin hesitated. The herald says they will burn her at noon tomorrow, if you do not come to the gate alone. Saren went very still against Varric's chest. She did not lift her head. She did not need to. She only whispered, against the skin over his heart, a word she had not spoken in 2 years. Orla. They rode for Vailon through the night. Varric would not let her travel alone. He set her on the saddle before him, wrapped his cloak around her shoulders, and kept one arm around her waist for every league of the hard road. Torvin rode at his right hand with his shoulder bound. The king's wolves ran alongside. Saren did not sleep. It had never occurred to her that Orla might still be at Valen. She had assumed her nurse had been sent away. She had not considered that Orla might have stayed, and watched, and waited. Of course she had. Orla had never been afraid of anyone in her life. They reached the ridge above Valen at the gray hour before dawn. The royal city looked wrong. Smoke rose in black lines from the outer quarter. The banners at the north gate were not the king's banners. A besieging camp had been thrown up in a half-crescent along the river, and at the heart of it, Saren could see the pale tents of House Sovereign pitched in the formation reserved for a house that had declared itself a crown. "They will not surrender her if I go alone," Varric said. "They will take me, and they will kill her, and half the kingdom will be at war with the other half before the snow melts." "Yes. So I am not going alone." "Varric, they are not expecting a woman." He looked down at her. She drew a breath. "Sovereign needs me alive. They tried to kill me at the cottage because they were rushing. Here, with Orla at stake, they will take me in alive. They will bring me to the inner tent. That is where I will have a use for the silver. You cannot hold the silver. Long enough to reach you through the bond. One word. You bring the wolves through the wall." Varric was silent for a long time. "If you die in that tent," he said, "I die in that tent." She reached up. She put her cold palm against his jaw. "Then be my mate," she said, "and trust me." He closed his eyes. He pressed his face into her palm. He whispered, "Go then." Saren walked into the Sovereign camp at first light with her hair unbound and the silk-wrapped ring pressed against her heart. The outer guards recognized her. By the time she reached the center tent, Lord Sovereign himself was waiting at the opening. He was taller than she remembered, thinner, his eyes the pale blue of his daughter's. He looked at her with the faint, polite satisfaction of a man who has just had something delivered he expected to send for. "Lady Mirren." "Lord Sovereign, where is Orla?" "Orla is inside." He stepped aside. "Please." Saren walked past him into the tent. Orla was sitting on a low stool by the brazier, her wrists bound in front of her, her gray hair braided as neatly as if she had done it herself that morning. She looked up when Saren entered. Her eyes did not widen. Her hands did not tremble. "Sweetling," Orla said, "I told you to burn the letter." "I know. You came anyway." "I came anyway." Behind Saren, the tent flap fell shut. A soft, familiar step moved behind her. "Hello, cousin," a voice said. Saren turned. The man who had entered the tent wore the colors of House Mirren, the dark green sash, the silver pin at the shoulder. His hair was the color of hers. His eyes were the color of hers. His face was a face she had grown up beside, and she had been told 2 years ago that he had died of a fever on the southern road while carrying a letter from her mother to her. "Karen." Her cousin smiled at her with genuine fondness. "Welcome home, Saren. We have been waiting for you for a very long time." Orla, behind her, made a sound like a woman who had found, at last, the answer to a question she had been working on for years. "You," Orla breathed. Karen inclined his head to the old woman, almost politely. "My Lady Orla, you have been a great trial to my uncle." "Your uncle?" "My mother's brother. Married quietly 15 years ago. A detail House Mirren found convenient to omit from its books." Saren could not move. She had grown up with this boy. She had learned to ride beside him. She had wept into his shoulder the night her father had died. He had taught her to recognize Varric from across a crowded hall. Everything. He had placed every piece on the board with his own hand. "The silver," Saren whispered. Karen nodded, delighted that she had arrived at it so quickly. "Yes, that is why my uncle needs you breathing. Our line bred the silver out of itself 6 generations ago, and then your great-grandmother put it back in. It was supposed to end with you. Your mother was very careful to see that it would. She made you swear, did she not?" "Yes." "Ah, but here you are. unsworn, and here we are. Sovereign, at the tent opening, lifted his hand. Two men stepped forward with a length of bright wire between them. Saren knew that wire. Every wolf-blooded child in Valen had been taught to know it. Wound silver, the kind used to bind witches. She took one step back. Her scar flared at her throat. The warmth of Varek's bond surged up through her ribs like a struck bell. One word, she had promised him. She drew the breath for it. She did not say it. Something else came out of her mouth instead. It was not a sound she had made before, not a sound she had known she could make. It was the sound the silver had been waiting 14 years to make through her, and it was not a word at all. It came from the mark at her throat, from the heart of her hands, from the place behind her ribs where the bond lived. The brazier went out. The lamps went out. The men with the wire went down on their knees as though they had been struck across the back of the legs. And Saren, at the center of the tent, began to burn. Not fire, silver, cold silver, pouring up out of the soles of her feet and out of the heart of her palms and out of the mark at her throat, rising around her in a slow, rushing column that filled the tent and lit the canvas from within, and began, quite clearly, to take a shape that was not her own. Lord Sovereign's mouth opened. He raised the dagger at his belt, and far off across the frozen fields outside the city, where a man on a ridge had his hand pressed flat against his own chest and his eyes closed against the pull of the bond, the Alpha King of Vylon heard his mate speak inside him for the first time in 2 years. Not in a word, but in a light. And he opened his eyes, and he shifted, and he began to run. The shape the silver took was a wolf. It was not Saren's shape. Saren still stood at the center of it, her bare feet on the churned frozen ground, her dress going strange in the light, her eyes open and seeing and streaming with the same silver that was pouring out of her hands. The wolf rose around her and above her, larger than any true wolf Saren had ever seen, its outline made of cold white fire and its eyes, where it lifted its great head, made of the same. It looked at Lord Sovereign. It did not growl. It did not bare teeth. The silver wolf had no mouth in the sense of teeth. It simply looked, and Lord Sovereign, who had raised his dagger, lowered it again, and then he dropped it, and then he knelt. Saren did not know if he knelt because he had chosen to, or because the silver would not let his knees hold him. She did not very much care. The two men with the wire had fallen flat. Karen was still on his feet. Her cousin was the one her silver did not immediately bring down, and she understood, in some cold corner of her mind, that this was because he carried the silver too. Dilute, old, but enough to stand inside it. Saren, Karen said. His voice had a new tremor in it. Cousin. Listen. Cousin, you must. Do not call me that. Saren, listen. The silver will burn you out. Your mother made you swear for a reason. If you hold this, I know what it costs. You do not. I do. She looked at him over the silver, and she saw him flinch from what was in her eyes, and she did not recognize the woman her cousin saw looking back at him, and she did not mind that she did not recognize her. Behind Karen, the tent canvas tore. It tore from the ridgepole to the ground in one clean vertical line, and the cold morning poured in, and a great black wolf came through it at full stride, and Varek did not stop to see who was in the tent before he killed. He killed the two men on the ground. He killed Lord Sovereign where he knelt. He killed a third man who had come in behind him through the tear, and he did not slow until his bulk was between Saren and every threat the tent contained, and then he turned, and he saw her inside the silver, and he stopped. The silver wolf above her turned its great head. It looked at him. He looked at her. For a long moment, in the wreckage of the tent and the small bright pool of her unmade power, the two of them simply stood. Then Varek lowered his head. The black wolf lowered his head to the silver wolf, the way the wolf at the broken window had lowered his head to her, and Saren felt the bond between them answer it, and the silver, which was burning her, which was eating her very fast, which she could feel consuming the soles of her feet, gathered inward to her hands. She opened her hands. The silver poured back into her. The wolf of light above her came down and folded again, and went, at the last, into the mark at her throat, and she staggered, and Orla's hands were suddenly on her elbows, and Varek was shifting behind her, and Karen was still standing, stupid with shock, at the edge of what had been the tent. Saren looked at her cousin. "Go," she said. "Run. I will not give you a second." Karen ran. Varek did not pursue him. Varek, naked to the waist again in the cold, with the blood of 3 men on him, came to her instead. He caught her as her knees gave. He eased her down to the ground. He gathered her against his chest, and he put his forehead against her hair, and he did not speak at all for a long time. Orla, kneeling beside them, worked her bound wrists against the edge of a fallen lamp until the cord parted. She rubbed her freed wrists with the practicality of a woman who had spent 6 weeks planning to untie her own hands the moment the door opened. And then she folded one hand over Saren's and the other over Varek's, and she sat with them in the wreckage. Outside the tent, the sovereign camp was coming apart. The king's wolves had breached the perimeter the moment the silver went up. By the time Saren could lift her head, the fighting was already spilling away from the inner ring of tents toward the river, and Torvin's voice was moving among it, giving orders, and somewhere, thin and clear in the cold morning, a horn was sounding the royal call for the first time in 2 years, and voices inside the walls of Valon were answering it. Saren let her head fall back against Varek's shoulder. "It is done," she said, and was surprised to find that it was true. Varek only tightened his arms around her. They did not take Valon back that morning. They took it back over 3 days, with careful counsels and harder conversations, and with the burning of a great deal of parchment, and with the quiet arrival at the palace of old Orla, who was given a room with the sun in it, and a chair by a fire, and a long rest. The Ilven were faced. The Mirren were faced. Accounts were settled, and older accounts were reopened, and an emerald ring dropped on the floor of a ballroom 6 weeks earlier was, at last, put into the earth in the herb garden behind the king's private chambers, where Saren planted a winter lily over it with her own hand. Karen was not found. The southern road swallowed him a second time. Isen Sovereign was found, 3 days later, waiting at the gates of Valon with her weapons surrendered and her wrists crossed. She asked for Saren by name. What passed between them in the small stone room where Saren met her was not written down. Isen lived. Isen was sent into the care of a northern house known for its patience. She wrote from there 1 letter a year, and Saren read each one, and Saren kept each one, and that is all that needs to be said of it. On the evening of the 4th day, Varek and Saren stood together on the balcony of the royal chambers, above the dark garden where her winter lily was already drinking the moon. The bond, Varek had told her, was not finished. Saren had known that. She had known it in the broken cottage. She had known it in the tent. The silver at her throat still warmed, the gold at his eyes still lit. But the thing between them that their mothers had called true had not yet been closed. "You bit me," she said. "In a forest clearing, 2 years ago." "Yes." "I never bit you back." "No. Turn around." He turned. She watched the long line of his bare back, the old scars on his shoulders, the place at the base of his neck where his dark hair lifted against the wind. She lifted her right hand. The silver came easier now, the way a language comes easier after the first hard conversation in it. It collected in her palm, cold and clean and slow, and when she pressed her palm flat to the place where his neck met his shoulder, it did not burn him. It sank into him. The mark it left was not a scar. It was a small, faintly luminous handprint over his pulse, silver as starlight. the shape of her fingers and her palm, and when she lifted her hand, she felt the bond close between them like a door being shut from the inside. Varric made a sound she had never heard him make. He turned. He caught her face in his hands. He pressed his forehead to hers, and the bond, now whole, rang like struck glass. And then, because the old stories had never been wrong about this, they saw each other. She saw him at 12, watching his father die on a battlefield outside Veilon. She saw him at 15, forcing a crown onto a head that was still a boy's head. She saw him walking the long stone gallery of his dreams for 2 years, looking for her at each tall window, and she saw that she had been walking her side of the gallery all that time too, and she had only thought she was alone. He saw her in the hayloft at 9, with her mother's hand at her face. He saw her at 20, at the Ilvan Hall, lifting her ring between them with a courage he had not understood until that moment. He saw her in the cottage at Ashenmore, with Orla's letter in her hand, finally reading the words she had carried for 2 years. Neither of them looked away. When they surfaced from it, Varric was weeping without sound, and Saren was weeping without sound, and the bond between them was the quiet bond of a thing that has been tested and has held. "My king," she said, "my queen." Outside, above Veilon, a single wolf howled from the trees beyond the wall. Another answered, far off. Another. Then a full chorus, the sound of a pack, that had been out of its king's voice for 2 long years and had, at last, been called home. Saren lifted her left hand between them in the old gesture. There was no ring on it. There would never be a ring on it again. The bond at her throat, the mark at his, the silver and the gold. These would do. These would last. These were the only rings they would need. "Not anymore," she said softly. And Varric, Alpha King of Veilon, whose teeth had once detonated against her throat in a forest clearing, whose hand had once closed around a clouded emerald in a ballroom of 200 silent witnesses, who had ridden 4 horses to their knees to reach her and broken an iced brook to cross to her, and knelt in the snow outside her window to ask for nothing but to be heard, the Alpha King bent his head. "Not anymore," he answered, and in the dark garden below, her winter lily opened its first white petal against the earth where a poor ring had been buried, and the bond between the king and his queen held and held and held. The kingdom, in time, called it the winter the king came home. Saren, when she was very old, called it by a different name. She called it the winter she stopped running.